In recent weeks, a wave of reports has begun to surface in global media that only months ago might have been dismissed as improbable or even unthinkable. Australia, one of Washington's most trusted allies in the Asia-Pacific and a cornerstone of U.S. strategy in the region, is now seriously considering the prospect of joining the BRICS bloc. This is not idle speculation or the product of rumor mills. Rather, it is being carried by respected outlets such as the Financial Times, The Guardian Australia, and Politico, each citing diplomatic sources with direct knowledge of the conversations quietly unfolding in Canberra. The narrative is gaining momentum. The once unshakable bond between Australia and the United States is showing visible cracks, and the possibility of Australia drifting toward an alternative sphere of influence is no longer a distant hypothetical, but a scenario openly weighed in both policy circles and business communities. According to Australian journalists, the heart of the issue lies in a growing perception that betting on Washington has ceased to deliver the strategic and economic benefits it once promised. For decades, Australia aligned itself with American security guarantees and economic cooperation, considering it the safest path in a volatile region. Yet this assumption has begun to unravel in the wake of Donald Trump's uncompromising protectionist policies. His administration's decision to impose sweeping tariffs not only on Chinese goods, but also on those of long-standing allies marked a turning point. For Australia, new tariffs on aluminum, steel, and agricultural products cut deep into its export-driven economy, inflicting immediate losses and sparking fears of long-term vulnerability. The damage was not only material but psychological, a painful reminder that even the closest partners were not immune from Washington's shifting priorities. Insiders close to Prime Minister Anthony Albanese's office reveal that this economic blow has fueled a serious rift within the Australian government. On one side stand ministers who cling to the traditional alliance with the United States, arguing that abandoning it would jeopardize decades of defense cooperation and strategic trust. On the other side grows a camp of officials and advisors who champion a path of strategic autonomy, calling for deeper engagement with rising powers like China, India, and Russia. Their influence has expanded in recent months, fueled not only by frustration with Washington's tariff measures, but also by a deeper unease about America's long-term reliability as a partner. This unease was exacerbated when Donald Trump bluntly declared during a Fox News interview that America would no longer babysit its allies if they refused to play by American rules. In the United States, such rhetoric may have been dismissed as characteristic political bravado, but in Australia, it struck a nerve. Many perceived it as an outright insult, a public downgrading of their role from valued partner to expendable subordinate. The remarks confirmed what many in Canberra had already begun to fear, that Washington is increasingly willing to sacrifice the interests of even its closest allies for short-term domestic political gain. China, by contrast, has seized the moment with careful precision. Over the past several months, Beijing's diplomats have intensified their activities in Canberra, extending a hand exactly where the United States pulled away. According to Bloomberg sources, Chinese envoys have offered Australia an array of trade concessions and investment guarantees in exchange for exploring closer cooperation within the BRICS Plus framework. Officially, these proposals are framed as opportunities to broaden economic horizons. Unofficially, they represent a carefully calculated strategic maneuver to pull Australia into a new orbit, one where the balance of power tilts decisively toward Beijing. If Australia were to make such a shift, the consequences for the United States would be profound. Analysts warn that Washington would not merely lose an ally, but a critical pillar of its entire security architecture in the Pacific Basin. The Lowy Institute in Sydney has pointed out that, in purely economic terms, Australia's orientation toward BRICS is already more logical than its current reliance on the US. More than 35% of Australian exports are destined for China, from iron ore to agricultural products, making Beijing its largest trading partner by far. When Washington turned to tariffs, Beijing wasted no time stepping into the vacuum, offering to expand purchases and secure long-term contracts on preferential terms. The South China Morning Post summarized it bluntly. China extended its hand at the very moment Australia needed support, something the United States failed to do. This shifting reality is not confined to expert analyses or think tanks. It has entered the boardrooms and industry associations of Australia itself. The Australian Aluminium Council, representing one of the industries hardest hit by American tariffs, issued a statement warning that thousands of jobs are at risk, and that a partnership painstakingly built over decades is being actively undermined. Across sectors, similar sentiments are emerging. Frustration that reliance on the United States has begun to generate risks rather than stability, and growing curiosity about what alignment with BRICS might offer. Meanwhile, across the Pacific, alarm bells are ringing inside the White House. The Washington Post reports that Trump's advisors are urgently exploring emergency measures designed to prevent Australia from sliding out of the American orbit. Ideas being floated range from new diplomatic overtures to the expansion of military agreements under the AUS alliance. Yet there is a growing realization that military guarantees alone may no longer suffice. Within Australia's own defense establishment, unease is mounting. Senior officers in the Ministry of Defense are increasingly asking uncomfortable questions in closed parliamentary hearings. If the United States were to go to war with China tomorrow, would Australia automatically be dragged into the conflict? Would it, by extension, become a target itself? These concerns, once theoretical, now weigh heavily on national security deliberations. At the same time, Beijing is quietly consolidating its influence on the ground. Beyond diplomatic gestures, China is backing its rhetoric with financial muscle, promising multi-billion-dollar infrastructure investments in Australian ports, railways, and logistics networks. Reports in the Australian press suggest that Chinese state banks are engaged in discreet discussions with leading financial institutions in Sydney and Melbourne, exploring avenues of long-term collaboration. Taken together, these moves resemble not ad hoc offers, but a coordinated strategic operation designed to gradually draw Australia into the gravitational pull of a new economic order centered on China, Russia, and India. For Washington, the prospect is nothing short of catastrophic. Analysts at the Rand Corporation have warned that losing Australia would undermine the entire U.S. strategy of containing China in the Indo-Pacific. Australia is not just another ally. It hosts some of America's most critical military assets, including bases essential for surveillance, communications, and satellite intelligence. Its defection would not only weaken America's operational reach, but would also send a powerful symbolic message that even America's closest partners are willing to consider alternatives if Washington fails to respect their interests. Step by step, what once seemed unthinkable is now unfolding as a tangible possibility. Australia, long viewed as an anchor of U.S. influence in the Pacific, finds itself at a crossroads, weighing the legacy of its alliance with Washington against the economic gravity and strategic opportunities offered by BRICS. The outcome of this choice will reverberate far beyond Canberra, shaping not only the balance of power in the Asia-Pacific, but the very architecture of global alliances in the years to come. If Canberra begins to edge away from Washington and toward Beijing, or in the most dramatic case, makes the leap into BRICS, the United States risks watching one of the strongest foundations of its Indo-Pacific architecture crack and collapse. For decades, Australia has been more than an ally. It has been the load-bearing pillar of America's Pacific strategy, the trusted partner that gave Washington both legitimacy and reach in the Southern Hemisphere. And yet, in the midst of this historic moment, Donald Trump appears either unable or unwilling to grasp the full scope of the threat. His speeches remain centered on the same familiar themes: tariffs, trade wars, and an insistence that allies must pay more for the privilege of American protection. This may resonate with voters at home, but abroad it increasingly comes across as hostile, dismissive, and tone-deaf. The paradox is stark. Trump's determination to punish China is instead pushing Australia, one of America's most reliable friends, directly into China's arms. If this process continues unchecked, the world could soon witness one of the most profound geopolitical realignments of the 21st century. What makes Beijing's strategy remarkable is not its bluntness but its subtlety. China is not strong-arming Australia with military threats or ultimatums. Instead, it is cultivating influence through patient, carefully crafted instruments: economics, infrastructure, and cultural exchange. According to reporting from Nikkei Asia, the China Development Bank and other state-linked institutions have already seeded Australia with multi-billion-dollar investments. These are not superficial projects but transformative ventures, sprawling green energy fields designed to position Australia as a clean energy superpower, the modernization of port facilities that could reorient trade flows toward Asia, and high-speed rail lines that promise to knit Australia's sprawling cities into a seamless, futuristic network. Beyond infrastructure, China is embedding itself into the intellectual life of the nation. In Sydney and Melbourne, joint research centres are being created where Chinese corporations collaborate directly with Australian universities, blending academic prestige with technological expertise. Each of these initiatives is packaged as a promise of mutual prosperity, but in practice they weave Australia ever more tightly into China's economic orbit, creating dependencies that may prove impossible to reverse. This campaign extends far beyond balance sheets and construction sites. Beijing is shaping narratives, identities, and national imagination. Chinese media, polished and broadcast in fluent English, are steadily reframing Australia, not as Washington's junior partner, but as a sovereign power with its own leadership role in the Pacific. Within Canberra itself, the debate is intensifying. More and more voices argue that BRICS membership would allow Australia to break free from America's long shadow and emerge as a power in its own right, no longer constrained by Western hierarchies. Reuters has reported that Chinese diplomats are already in active dialogue with Australian trade unions and business groups, offering binding contracts for workers and guaranteed markets for exports if Australia commits to BRICS. The message is clear: join us, and you will not only secure prosperity but also status, influence, and independence. But this is not just about jobs or contracts. At its core, China's offer is strategic. Beijing is dangling before Canberra the chance to become a central supplier of raw materials and energy to the economies of BRICS, a role that would make Australia indispensable to a bloc representing nearly half the world's population. Analysts writing in the Australian Financial Review describe this as a ticket to the Club of Nations, destined to dominate the future resources market. Against this vision, America's message feels increasingly hollow. While Washington closes doors with tariffs, and while Europe slides further into paralysis and crisis, Beijing offers Australia not just a seat at the table, but a starring role in the theater of tomorrow. India's position adds another layer of complexity. Historically, the relationship between Canberra and New Delhi has been uneven, marred by mistrust and missed opportunities. Yet now, in a stunning reversal, India is openly encouraging Australia's potential entry into BRICS. According to The Hindu, New Delhi sees Australia's accession as a way to strengthen the bloc's southern flank, bolster its resilience against Western pressure, and provide India with the opportunity to play mediator between Beijing and Canberra. For India, this is more than strategy. It is a chance to elevate itself as a broker of great power relations, to craft the role of architect in a new global order no longer defined by American primacy. The reverberations in Washington are unmistakable. Reports in the Wall Street Journal suggest that within the U.S. National Security Council, confidential memos are already being drafted under the heading, Partial Loss of Australia. These analyses do not mince words. If Canberra joins BRICS, America's alliance network in Asia could unravel like a house of cards. Once Australia defects, others may follow. New Zealand, the Philippines, and eventually even partners in Southeast Asia who begin to calculate that the future lies with BRICS rather than with a distracted and protectionist America. The irony is painful. A domestic political strategy designed to strengthen America's bargaining position, Trump's tariffs and his demands for allied burden sharing, is instead triggering a chain reaction abroad that threatens to destroy the very system of alliances America has spent generations building. Unless Washington swiftly adapts, offering allies not only protection but also partnership, not just deterrence but genuine opportunity, the world could be on the verge of an entirely new configuration of power. In such a world, BRICS would no longer be dismissed as a loose coalition of emerging markets. It would instead stand as a full-fledged counterweight to the West, a rival pole of global authority. Australia's entry would give it unprecedented legitimacy, transforming it into a true alternative system. And in that transformation, Canberra would stand as the Trojan horse, a Western nation slipping into the gates of BRICS, carrying with it both symbolism and substance, signaling that America's once unshakable order is beginning to fracture.